Hi, everybody. Welcome back to A Saul and Battery. As a reminder, plenty of spoilers in Better Call Saul all the way up to season 6, episode 11.
A Saul and Battery, hosted by Ellie.
Wow. So this was a long episode, an hour and 20 minutes with commercials. So kind of a bonus episode. Interesting one. I enjoyed it. It does seem like a bridge. Like there's going to be a lot more coming after that. But before we begin, I'd just like to say Sling sucks. I totally hate Sling. All the way through Better Call Saul, as we're watching the final season, they begin to show the kind of the previously on portion, and Sling drops commercials into that. And the ones on this episode, they dropped it in enough that it actually crowded into the start of the episode, totally kind of ruining. They put so much energy and thought into these things, and for Sling to just kind of slap a couple quick ads in there to get another some more money, I guess. Very irritating, terrible experience. Sling sucks. Okay, so I did eventually get back to the show, and when it did start, we're in color. It's Saul rolling around in the RV. We know he's at the point where it was between, we saw in Breaking Bad, Jesse and Walt kidnap him, put a bag over his head, and then we saw them out in the desert. This is the time in between. And no dialogue at this point in time, but pretty short, cold open. It's just mostly him rolling around, speaking a lot of Spanish. And that's about it. And then we cut back to the opening, which continues to grade even more. There's like now some rewindings and recordings and the blue screen, VCR blue screen stuff going on again. Now we're back into the Gene timeline. How do we know we're in the Gene timeline? We're back into black and white. It was interesting. I listened to the Better Call Saul Insider podcast for episode 10. And I think Melissa Bernstein slipped up a little bit when she was talking about, she directed the episode that was the entire Gene episode in black and white. And towards the end of the discussion, she mentioned, Peter pulled all the directors, plural, together to talk about and had given them kind of a primer on black and white and some of the things he was looking for. So I think we're going to, over these last several episodes, get a pretty heavy dose of black and white. And I think that was something that each of these directors needed to deal with. And it kind of brought in the big four for directors for these final four episodes. So episode 10 was Melissa Bernstein. That's going to be followed. Tonight's episode was Thomas Snows. Then it's going to be followed by Vince Gilligan. And then the final episode is directed by Peter Gould. So some heavy hitters from the Breaking Bad era coming in to finish things off. But we're there, and it's, this whole episode, you're a little bit off balance through most of it, trying to piece it together. Francesca's back, which is always awesome. She's working on a sink in a really kind of dingy apartment. There's a couple bros there dropping out things like, conjugate much, and these kinds of things. She's complaining about seeds and stems in the sink, and they're kind of say, "Oh, we don't do drugs and all that." But you're like, is this Francesca's life? Is she now rooming with a couple of bros? But as we turns out, we see that as she leaves, she's doing some sort of a rental type of deal now, and so she's kind of doing that. And then she starts to drive away, and as she's driving away, she kind of keeps looking up into her rearview mirror and kind of thinks she's being followed. We're kind of led to believe she's being followed. She eventually does a couple loops around. Shakes happens if there's someone was following her. She happens to shake them. During this trip, we see a bench, and it's kind of the Better Call Saul advertising bench. But now William Oakley is on it, and we'll find out momentarily that he has switched over to be a defense attorney, and it does look like William Oakley is on the road to be the next Saul Goodman of the Albuquerque area. So then we get the 3:00 call. Now, I don't remember. I'm going to have to go back and listen if in the flash forward they had shown previously on Better Call Saul, did Saul say, when Francesca said, "Hey, if they don't call right at 3:00, I'm leaving." And then I thought he said, "Don't worry, they'll call." But the they ends up being him. So that's a little bit confusing to me because I really thought that was going to be Kim on that 3:00 call, but it was actually Gene. And so maybe he said, "Don't worry, it'll ring." but I kind of thought he said, "Don't worry, they'll call." So it's just a kind of a continuity thing that I got to go back and check. But it was Gene, and he was mostly trying to get the lowdown on what was going on. He had managed to pull off, I'm not sure how he managed to do this, but a very kind of crafty way, because Francesca is always motivated by the money, and she doesn't do much without being funded. And there was this very elaborate kind of look under this rock, pull this string, and eventually she'll get to the money that the rats didn't eat, which was a concern of Gene's there. But and I also learned something new in this episode, which is that New Jersey is indeed the outline of New Jersey is indeed very similar to Albert Hitchcock in a Fez. So something we all got to learn tonight. So Vanessa provides Gene quite a bit of updates. Skylar got a deal. Kubi's MIA. Nobody knows where he's at. Huel apparently caught a break due to illegal detention, and he's back in New Orleans. A couple other folks, Ira, I believe he asked about, and Ira's a little bit uncertain where that's at. Francesca does mention that Kim called her to check in to see how she was doing, and did mention that she asked about Saul/Gene, which Gene was very excited about that she had done that. And as this particular scene ends, we have Gene driving down the road and coming up to a large crossroads. So I'm assuming this crossroads symbolic for, at this point, he's kind of making a turn to say, I'm going to quit hiding and be in my shell, and I'm going to start to be more Saul-like, be more Slip and Jimmy-like, and I'm also going to reach out to Kim, which he does. Makes a call. Apparently she's down in Florida working at a sprinkler company, and we don't get to hear any of it, but the call does not go well. There's shouting, and Jimmy basically destroys the phone booth after the call's over. So now we're back again to Gene at the Cinnabon briefly, followed by Gene back at Jeff's, and Jeff comes home, and Jeff has gotten Marion a new computer, and she's learning all things about funny cat videos from Gene because he stopped by. Jeff's pretty weirded out that Gene's there because he thought everything was done. Gene asks Marion to excuse him and Jeff. They're going to go out to the garage and look at the car that they were working on. And as they're walking out, you can tell Marion's looking a little bit suspicious. More on that later. She looks a little bit suspicious. Gene starts talking to Jeff about what shift you're on. He's wanting to get to a certain night shift. He also says we need to get some barbiturates. And so Jeff's kind of like, what? I thought I was supposed to ignore you. I thought we were done. And basically Jimmy's saying we're going to be back in business. And Jeff's actually pretty enthusiastic about getting back in the game. So on past Breaking Bad Insider podcasts, Bob Odenkirk has mentioned that he's not a good singer. He's able to validate that as he gives a very painful rendition of Brandy in a bar. There's a guy that apparently he's been losing bets with all night long under now the name Victor. So we got Jimmy, Saul, Gene, and then we know Victor kind of comes in and out for at least for Jimmy. He did as another name, but he's in his Victor mindset, and he's kind of working with this guy who seems to be scamming Victor, which we know is not true. Can't really happen long term. And a lot of drinks are flowing. And what we see is there's been an elaborate siphon set up. And as new drinks come along, the Mark continues to drink the drink, and Gene, Victor, pops a little tube in there and is basically filling like a hot water bottle down with a siphon. So he's not drinking anything, and he gets the other guy hammered. Then they get out of the bar afterwards. Cab pulls up. We're pretty sure it's Jeff. We're not guaranteed that initially, but we don't have visual evidence of it. But they do another bet that Victor loses again. Shocker. He gets in that, and sure enough, it's Jeff in the cab, and just kind enough to offer him some water, which we all know is likely laced with barbiturates. And so eventually this guy gets home. He's even in worse shape than when he got in. And as he staggers in the door, Jeff runs a piece of duct tape across the latch and leaves. So in that trip, as Jeff was doing that, we saw somebody call him with a fake cab call to his next destination and all that. And the guy was sitting in a truck with a dog. And we now just left with the tape on there. And this guy shows up at the house, goes inside of it, pulls out the guy's wallet or something he has. All these folks, spoiler, there are a bunch of people that are going to get this scam done. Everybody's keeping their stuff in their suit jacket in the front, which is super helpful than a wallet that they could be potentially laying on top of. but they're able to get to it. They pull it out. This individual takes a bunch of pictures. It's a super well behaved dog. He walks in and he sets the dog at the front door, and the dog very politely sits there as the guy finishes his work, which is photographing licenses, credit cards, goes to a desk, gets some documents, bank statements. So captures a lot of documents. He's getting ready to leave, walks out the door. The camera lingers on the door. You saw the door shut with the tape still there, and you're like, oh no, did they forget it? Is this how the scam's going to be figured out? But then you see him come back and take the tape off. And then what we've all been waiting for, the return of Walt and Jesse. So this is now after Saul had been in front of the pit and they're heading back, and Saul's piecing together that they're the folks actually cooking the blue meth. Walt's keeping to try and keep the information on the low. Jesse, on the other hand, seems to be wanting to provide all sorts of information about rounded flasks and all sorts of other things. And as Walt's pushing on him to kind of quit providing the details, he kind of reminds Walt that it was Walt's idea to pull the mask off his face to begin with, which kind of spoiled the whole secrecy thing anyway, way back in Breaking Bad. Is magic. You see Aaron Paul and Bryan Cranston going back and forth at each other, the whole Walt-Jesse relationship. Just hilarious. Hit every note there. Saul calls shotgun Gene. Saul calls, this gets hard, folks. Saul calls shotgun. They're driving back. Walt coughs into his hand. Saul may or may not have seen that there was blood. Also in this process, Jesse asks about Lalo. Saul's kind of giving up nothing on that. And then in a really kind of cinematic shot, they focus in on that hole in the desert in color, and then it fades back to black and white with Gene in bed. So Gene has a delivery. It's the foot jiggler. I don't know what the scientific name for those things is, but it's the thing that Saul was using in Breaking Bad. And so he's got a new one back. So more and more of his old personality is coming back. Now let's just take a second here on timeline. What we've really started to figure out, I had originally made the assumption when this whole thing started that the Gene timeline was years after the events in Breaking Bad, but it's starting to look like it's not even a year. It may be months afterwards when you start to see some of the dates on either licenses and these types of things, and the fact that Jimmy and Francesca were having a call trying to get status where things were at. We kind of recognize that the Gene has not been in Nebraska that long. It's been probably a couple months, but not a huge amount of time has passed. So then we kind of come back to see that the scheme has been repeated multiple times. He gets a guy drunk. They go to the cab, they get the barbiturates, somebody comes in, photographs the documents, and there are a lot of people that they're doing that to. And then you find out all this is being collected for them to go to somebody else who's creating kind of fake ideas or IDs or identity theft, and they're getting money for basically this data they're providing. So you see a lot of the other old things starting to come back. So now Gene's starting to have a lot more hired female visitors at night and show a shot of him in the strip club, bring somebody back. You can see that happens multiple times. You're seeing the scam happen multiple times. The money keeps rolling in. We've got more money being stacked in a little secret hiding place, a la Breaking Bad. Burner phones show up again, always a staple of certainly Slip and Jimmy. And then finally, the last mark that we see him working ends up being a kind of a nice guy, nice-ish guy. Turns out he's got cancer, and kind of kind of a little bit of that information came forward to Gene. And so they're talking, and you see him hesitate a little bit before pulling the trigger on the scam, but then apparently he gets over it, loads him up in his cab, and off he goes. And other great news, we get Mike back again, and so now we're back in the Saul Goodman timeline. Saul Goodman back on the foot jiggler thing again as Mike comes in for a report. Saul says, "You're on the clock. Start giving me the information since I'm paying for it." Mike makes it clear that he is not going to be providing Saul any information until he gets off that weird device. In the typical Mike way, involving a foot through a skull kind of conversation. And so he comes through there, and there's lots of updates on different things are going. Saul's super happy to hear that the truck driver that he's representing actually does have a broken neck. He goes, "That's always easier. It's good to know." And then this is where Mike's given the report on Walt. So Jimmy had been kidnapped by these folks, had done the pieces. So again, we see him show up the very first episode that Saul Goodman shows up in Breaking Bad. This work had been done beforehand for Mike to kind of get the lowdown. So he did, he's a high school chemistry teacher, and then also shares he's got cancer, And Mike, in no uncertain terms, saying this guy's an amateur. I wouldn't mess with him. This is a bad idea. Stay away. And you can see Saul kind of lost in thought. And I don't think he's going to listen to Mike's advice. We know he's not going to listen to Mike's advice, but it's pretty good advice, as usual, from Mike. There's also kind of a neat Gus reference in here, and the old "he who shall not be named," who clearly would be Gus, but Mike hadn't even brought Walt up to Gus at this point in time because he viewed him as an amateur and bad news anyway, and that he knew Jesse was a meth head, so it just did not seem to fit the Gus Fring employee profile. We see more drinks being poured. We assume, is this yet another scam? But no, this is just Gene at home. And another thing that has now come back into Gene's life is the Bluetooth headphone. It starts ringing. He gets it. He's clearly upset by what he hears. And he says, "Get him to the garage," and hustles out. So they make their way to the garage. As they make their way to the garage, Marion, who's continuing to enjoy her silly cat videos, hears a dog barking and looks out the window and sees, I'm pretty sure she sees Gene. She definitely sees action going on in the back in her garage. And I believe she sees Gene in that scene as well. And her suspicions continue to grow. Obviously, probably a little more to come of that. Turns out that the big problem is Buddy, the dog accompanied individual, was just like, "Hey, I started to do it, but I saw this guy had cancer, the same kind of pills that one of his relatives had." And he said, we're making enough money. I can't do this. And boy, Gene is locked into this at this point in time. And I think it's probably because the Kim call went bad that he really kind of immersed himself in this environment. But he is dead set to say, don't really care if he's got cancer or not. We're going to finish this job. So Buddy gets fired. Jeff, he's asking Jeff, "Hey, are you still in or not?" Jeff's saying, "I guess I'm still in." He still wants to stay in this, but he's also kind of a little bit hesitant. But Gene is just dead set that this is going to happen. Then we get to kind of real quick jump back to, again, not shown in Breaking Bad, but just before Saul bursts in the door of Walt's classroom, we show him approaching the high school. And so I'm kind of seeing the connection here in that there's a couple instances when Saul and Gene make really bad decisions about people with cancer. Saul starting to be willing to work with Walt, and now Gene dead set on completing the scam against somebody who's done it, who Jeff pointed out, "Hey, we gave them the stuff hours ago at this point in time. He may not even still be asleep. There's all sorts of risk factors on there. The tape's already been taken off, so they're going to have to break in." So Jeff's concerned, but Gene says, "Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." And in fact, Gene is going to handle it by breaking into the house. And the last scene we see is him elbowing through a window and turning the latch. And then we fade to black for this episode. So a fun one, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of lack of closure for us leading into the next one. Now, the teaser for the next one shows a cop car with a couple folks getting out. So you would think, when logic prevails, to say, oh, exactly what's going to happen is this didn't go well and Gene got arrested. But when you also think about this group that has loved to kind of do these twists and turns on you all the way through, that, the little teaser previews we get don't always play out the way you'd think they could. Like just like that, a happy ending. You certainly didn't think it was going to be applied to a fictional dog. But this episode was called Breaking Bad. We got a nice little revisit of Walt and Jesse that couldn't have been more perfect, in my opinion. Fun episode. Looking forward to catching the last two. Thanks for watching, everyone.